All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of Now Do with Dio. I'm your host, Dio, and this episode is going to be a little untraditional because I have a very special guest who is right next to me. Did you want to introduce who you are?
Sure. My name is Nikki, and I don't know what you want me to say.
You're Nikki, and who are you?
Who am I? Well, I'm a third-year medical student at UCSF. I'm Dio's girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm hosting today because I wanted to find out a little more about Dio's motivation for doing this podcast. So I thought that we could start by learning a little more about you.
Sure. I feel like you know a lot of the premise and background about this, so it is a little odd that I'm repeating this on camera, but we're gonna do it anyway for the spirit of the episode. And one of the main reasons why I'm doing this podcast, or very recently turned into this podcast a living thing, because it's been an abstract that's been in my head for a while, and there's just this belief that I have when it comes to the power of storytelling, because I'm a firm believer that everyone and their moms have a really, really good story. And who would we be without one? And it doesn't matter if our friends are 2 years younger or 5 years older than us. I think that's where the beauty comes in. It's the different perspectives that we get to learn, or I get to learn as a host, or have that privilege of learning, because it's always something new. And as someone who's so interested on just the concept of storytelling, but more so understanding who they are, I think it's very important. And like I said, it's been a lot of these things that you see right now are things that have been in my head that I just never got a chance to do, or didn't have the energy to do. And that's why I'm doing this.
So what I'm hearing is storytelling is really important to you. And I value that a lot coming from Native Hawaiian culture. Storytelling is everything. We do it through dance, talking story, through pretty much everything. It's super important.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear that storytelling is the heart of this. And I think that part of getting to know other people helps you to better understand yourself. And I think vice versa, you have to know a lot about yourself in order to find those similarities with other people. So tell me a little bit more about you and kind of what you're bringing to the podcast.
A little bit about me. I am a son. I was born in Indonesia, May of 1998. You guys could calculate how old I am now. And I came to the States when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And fun fact, I'm an only child. And I think ever since then, a lot of my upbringing involves just being around parents who have struggled and currently are struggling with the navigation of day-to-day life in a new country. And not only language barriers is one of the challenging things in our lives, but it's money, it's the social aspects of things, it's tackling difficult dialogues like mental health issues, and even college and post-college. So a lot of these things, and I've said this before to you, I've said this to you before, is that I feel like every day I am writing my own test script. I am writing my own navigation map of, not only as a son, but as a student and as a professional who have identified as a DACA recipient and is now on the pathway to a permanent residency. And so I think everything ever since then up until now is still a story in the making. And I would be lying to you if I said I have everything figured out, because I don't. I truly don't. And the beauty of this podcast is, selfishly speaking, is for me to also find some guidance from people's perspectives, because it makes me feel a little better that I may not be alone in writing this test script of my own, or of my life. And I hope to really bring the lessons that I've learned over the course of my life. I hope to bring and share the mistakes that I've made, so people could either avoid it or still do it anyway, obviously in a safe, a safe way. Because again, I believe that the best way for us to learn is to truly, truly make mistakes, right? And I think, you know, we don't truly ever learn until we do something wrong. And so I hope to bring that here in the podcast.
Absolutely. I think that you've gone through a lot in your life and you have a lot to share.
Mm-hmm.
And through this podcast, you are also receiving from a lot of people the gifts of their lessons and their life and their stories.
Mm-hmm.
You speak of having a lot of lessons that you want to bring into these podcasts. Can you tell me one of those lessons?
Absolutely. And I think one of the main lessons I could share tonight, and I've experienced this very recently, and you're well aware of this, is, just the concept of changes, right? And Nikki and I have had a lot of dialogues about just getting up and move forward with my life without the feeling of guilt because of what either my mom or dad says to me. So, for example, growing up in an Indonesian household, or Southeast Asian household in general, you are kind of, I wouldn't say manipulated, but you're kind of ingrained in a culture and ingrained in that principle where family tops everything. What that means is you prioritize your mom and dad, and then you prioritize you, and then everything else comes after that. And as somebody who has migrated to the States, I still have to live with those values no matter what. And so this time last year, I had danced with the idea of moving out with them. And even though at the time it was all talk, the game plan wasn't really solidified, it wasn't finalized. But it was then and there where I've gotten a lot of, not negative feedback, but a lot of deterrent coming from their side. And they would say something like, "You should stay. There's no point for you to waste money on rent. There's no point for you to live in a new city because you know nobody. It's safer for you to be here with us. You don't pay rent. You don't have to cook or anything. Everything will be prepared," right? Now, that's great. I think I can say that with a lot of privilege because I do have parents who are very understanding, who are capable of providing these things for me. I speak from a position of privilege. However, because of my privilege of having means, of having the social status, the mental strength to just get up and go, and on top of that, the professional privilege too, where I can work from home literally anywhere within the country, I can just get up and go and move to a different city whenever I'd like. And when I decided to do that and I finalized that plan last November, they were not happy at all. And, because of our discussions and because of what I've learned on the side too, the cost benefit analysis is something we had to do together, right? Like, when does it ever make sense to move, or like, how can we make it the most sense? And then you realize, even as you're doing this cost benefit analysis, like, the timing is never going to be right. Like, it's always going to be now or never. That's where I was in that time of my life. And so come December, when I signed my lease, and my parents were super frustrated. They were not the happiest. And I think it wasn't because, they didn't want me to sort of live my life the way I wanted to. I think it's because they were scared that they wouldn't have me as a resource or as a guide for them and with them. But the hardest part about that was accepting that, this had to happen either way. It was accepting that it's going to come with guilt. It still comes with guilt to this day, living in this new city. But like you said, right? Like, we have to have this experience one way or another if we are of means, if we have the privilege to do this. So changes are important. I was scared of it. You saw that too. I was scared of, coming back and restarting this chapter of my life, moving to a city where I knew 2 to 4 people max and starting over from the beginning. And again, at age 25, I really didn't know how to even start the test script like I was telling you about in the beginning. Like, where do I even start on this paper, right? No one is going to tell you, oh, when you're moving into an apartment, you're going to have to buy shower curtains. We forgot that initially. When you're moving into an apartment, you start to have reading like, these water bills, these electricity bills. You're reading the fine prints, and then you're trying to navigate the city, within its public transportation and everything in between. It's hard. It's hard. The only thing that's going to remain the same is going to be change. And I think as soon as I accepted that, which didn't take me long, 2 weeks when I moved in, I accepted that, I'm in a trajectory where change is going to be inevitable. So that's one thing I had to learn the hard way. But even then, as their son, I do still feel guilty of leaving. I do still feel guilty, and I don't know why. But I'm trying to give myself grace a little bit here and there. I know it comes with time, but I still keep in contact whenever I can, or as much as I can. But it's not always going to be that way too. So that's what I learned.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot wrapped in that. I resonated with the statement, change is scary. It's very scary. I grew up in California. I remember the first time I left California, I moved to Philly, where I met you. Same situation, navigating a totally new city. I had no family or friends and really had to lean into myself. It's a journey of self-discovery, which is really beautiful and really scary. I do think that we grow the most when we feel the most uncomfortable. So it's times like these when we challenge ourselves to be able to self-actualize, to be able to learn more about ourselves. Because when we stay in one place, we're stagnant. That being said, I think you touched on a lot of really difficult factors in your life. You're the only child to immigrant parents. There's a cultural aspect and this expectation or responsibility to take care of your parents and stay home.
Exactly.
So I think it takes a lot of courage to determine what was best for you, which in this moment sounds like moving here was the best decision. Might not be the best decision for everyone.
That's right.
But for you, it seems to be working out. And one consequence of you moving is this podcast. Oh.
It is. It is definitely, I wouldn't even say a consequence too, right? Because I would say this was a work that had to be done either way, right? Like I've talked to you about this even when I was living in my parents' house. Like, I've always thought about doing this, like seeing this whole setup and investing in mics. Like this was bound to happen, but when was it going to happen? It wasn't going to when I was there because the motivation just wasn't there, right? I was too comfortable, like you said. I didn't feel like I had to try harder than what I already did at the house because I knew that everything was served on a civil plate for me. This investment in stuff like this was a dream really, like what we're listening to now and what we're watching now is literally a dream. And I'm glad you're part of this too. And even being part of the first episode, and I would encourage everyone to do the same if they can, especially you too, because I think the more we hold off on things we actually want to do, we start to think too deep into what could have happened or on the what if. And I knew that one of the bucket lists I wanted to cross off as soon as I moved was doing this. And I started early because I knew like I still had that passion. I had that energy coming here, right? Maybe it is just the city of Atlanta, or maybe it was just something I had to rediscover within myself to start up again, right? Everything starts to change. Your physical body starts to change in a good way. Your mental aspect is improving. There's literally, I wouldn't say there's literally nothing wrong, but I would say the pros outweigh the cons ever since I moved. But again, I still think about the cons, and I still think about, maybe my purpose in life is to, help my parents. Maybe it's to financially support them. But I've realized that they're still at an age where they can do that on their own. And like you said, I, selfishly speaking, need to take advantage of this time to discover who I am, what my purpose is in life, while they are able to help themselves stand.
That makes a lot of sense. I think there's so much life to live, and you're finding your purpose. Honestly, I think the lessons that you will get from living on your own in a new city, and the lessons that you get from talking to other people through this podcast, will make you a better person, will make you a better son, will allow you to go back and care for your parents in a way that you couldn't otherwise. And it'll be something that you and your parents appreciate in the long term, but in the short term, I know it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to this podcast, your plan is to bring in these guests to talk about their life stories, kind of big life lessons. What do you have in store for us?
That's a great question. I don't want to sound too vague, but I don't also want to sound too detailed. What I do have in store is the side of people that we don't necessarily get to see in our day-to-day interactions with them. And even you and I, for example, right? Like, we're still learning about each other. We're discovering who we are with each other. But when we're in front of the cameras and when we're, like just being very intimate the way we are now, we don't get a chance to do this with all of our friends every day, right? So whether the episode is 30 minutes or whether it's 45 minutes or an hour, that time that we use are times I'd like to consider both parties being vulnerable, and I hope being genuine, right? Because we don't really get a chance to sit on this couch and, tell me about your life story. That's not a thing, especially the first time you meet either. And I have, guests who are just, again, I'm just super privileged and super blessed to have people who are just down and trust in the process, for this, because they know that even though this podcast is going to be unreleased in the near future and it's still a work in progress, they trust me enough to create what I have in my head. So I think what I'm seeking for in this podcast through my guests are their vulnerability side of things and the emotional aspects of things too. I think we just don't stop and just talk with each other, and that's why I'm so driven and so motivated to do this.
Sounds super deep.
Too deep. And I think the conversations are going to be a lot harder to host when I'm on that side of the couch too, because it's one thing I do want to share too is I I don't have any training in hosting whatsoever. I'm just kind of sitting here and just let me talk to you, right? Like one thing I am good at is holding up a conversation, but again, I'm not a licensed or trained professional. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist, not a therapist either, not even a guru. So for me to just sit here and just talk to someone, I feel like it's a skill I feel like I need to use in my life. And however God tells me to do it and however he's going to creatively direct me, I'm just going to do it. Lay it on him. So
I think that's real. I think what you're bringing to the podcast is like just like being real, genuine, like not training, not fake,
no.
like media. Like you're just bringing your full true self and you're asking your guests to do the same. So I think that's one aspect that makes this podcast really special and unique is you're getting into those deep philosophical existential questions of who people are at their core. And you're doing it conversationally without the additional pressure of like, where is this going? We're just having a conversation. I just want to learn about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to take what you tell me and apply it to my life to be a better person. I think that's powerful.
And I think you're very good at doing this too, honestly. Like if you were the host of a podcast, I would definitely give it a listen. So maybe you could consider giving it a try. Who knows?
Well, let's see. You know, if the whole doctor thing doesn't work out, I can also podcast is the second option.
That's true. She's very great at hosting. I mean, this is her first time doing this, so
I think, just I think some closing question.
Mm-hmm.
Why should people listen to this podcast?
That's a hard question. That is a hard question. I think we could or we should listen to this podcast because the interactions that I hope to hold with my guests are something that all of us, not just people watching or listening, but even me and whoever's going to be on the other side of the couch, are going to take away. It's to really drive and encourage people, not to tell people what to do. I'm not a believer of that, but it's to really encourage and push that energy that you thought you didn't have within you. But after an episode or maybe 2, maybe 4, you find that energy within you and you get up and you say, I'm going to do it. Hence the title, Now Do. There's a big difference between saying, I'm going to do it and just simply doing it, right? I think with the creation of this podcast is I had no game plan of how this was going to be. All I knew was I have a skill in holding a conversation. I have a solid means of investing in equipment, fortunately, and very privileged, thankful for that. And I know that it was always a voice in my head to just do this, right? So the more often these voices come with me and in me, it's like, I'm going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. So I hope people listening can start hearing to those voices, those positive voices to drive them, to push them in ways that they didn't even know they could. I think that's why we should listen to this podcast. And I'm really, really excited for it. I'm really excited for it. I'm more excited than nervous, to be honest. Because I know when you are called to do something, it just doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're completing your main mission. I think my 9 to 5 is like my side mission. But this is, I feel like or at least one of my true callings.
Well, you heard it here.
You did?
This podcast will teach you to embrace change, to take action in your life. It's hearing people's stories and taking from it what applies to your life and then putting it into action. because there's always something to learn from other people, and Dio is here to unravel what those lessons are.
Amen. Thank you so much for hosting this. This was super untraditional, super unexpected. But let me just say before we end, this was all her idea. So thank you to you. It's my partner in crime. Let me just say this too. She has been the one strongly encouraging me to do this. Even with the game plan of, do I invest in the cameras or do I rent a camera for the first trial and run? She's been there for that. And she was one of those positive voices in my head to just tell me, just do it. If you're really, really passionate about this, and do it. And here we are, having her the host the first episode and me being the guest. How weird is that? But thank you, really.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll hope to see you on the next episode. Peace.